everybody. How you doing? I want to welcome everybody to this installment of the Los Angeles Asian Pacific Film Festival. I'm going to do something that I normally don't do whenever I'm hosting a show. I'm basically going to read from a script because there's just so much.
Who wrote the script?
Who wrote the script? We'll find out later. Well, not me, but we'll find out. Let's go ahead and do this so that everybody knows where everybody is at. And if I kind of sound a little bit robotic and not as natural as I normally do, it's like I'm reading type that's this big while not trying to look this big. So bear with me, everybody. First and foremost of all, I want to welcome everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Abraham Ferrer, and I'm a staff member here at Visual Communications, the nation's premier Asian Pacific American Media Arts Center. Happy Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This is day 4 of a whole month of activities. And welcome to what is technically the 36th edition of the Los Angeles Asian Pacific Film Festival, but really the first ever virtual showcase of the festival presented by VC. From celebrating our histories and cultures to mobilizing our communities to be socially and politically active, we present the virtual showcase to keep us connected. The showcase is brought to you by our partners at Comcast, NBC Universal, Sony Pictures, Nielsen, HBO and Warner Media and National Geographic. And as always, for more information, please visit Visual Communications at vcmedia.org. Also, we like to thank the sponsors who have supported Visual Communications, and particularly the programs from the Photographic and Media Archive, and that includes the Aratani Foundation, the California Civil Liberties Public Education Program, the National Film Preservation Foundation, the Department of Cultural Affairs of the City of Los Angeles, the California Arts Council, the California Humanities, the Historical Cultural Neighborhood Council, Sustainable Little Tokyo, and the Little Tokyo Service Center's Plus Lab. We'd also like to thank the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture, as well as UCLA's Community Archives Lab, supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, who both support our archives interns throughout the year. It's a Monday, everybody. And I just got through like a really big script. And what we're doing here is we're highlighting films from Visual Communications' over 350 filmography strong archive. Over the years, this organization has been a pioneer in creating works here. And tonight, we're going to be talking about one of those films, Claiming a Voice, which was produced in 1990. And it's a documentary film that chronicles the first 2 decades of visual communications. To talk about the film, we're very, very pleased to have with us a couple of folks here. And if I can, introduce them. The first is Arthur Dong, a Peabody Award-winning and Academy Award-nominated film director, a triple Sundance Award-winning filmmaker whose works center around Asian American and LGBTQ stories. His works include Family Fundamentals, Coming Out Under Fire, Forbidden City, USA, and The Killing Fields of Dr. Hang S. Noor. His latest book, Hollywood Chinese, a pictorial companion to his documentary by the same name, was selected as a Critics' Choice by the Los Angeles Times and is one of, quote unquote, 13 smart must-read books of race and hate by The Advocate. The cat in the Hawaiian print shirt is Walt Louis, who has been in the broadcast media business since 1974. He has worked as a producer, director, associate director, editor, and instructor. Originally from San Francisco, the son of immigrants, he has worked on productions in Los Angeles for over 35 years. As an editor, he's worked on a boatload of stuff. I'm just going to cut it short like that. And he is currently a board member of Visual Communications. Now, that is the written description of both Arthur and Walt. But to kind of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about, it gets really important to know a little bit about, the visual communications of the 1980s and how they kind of like came into, the whole picture. Anybody who knows about visual communications knows about, its founding in 1970. The four founders, Dwayne Kubo, Robert Nakamura, Alan Ohashi, Eddie Wong, again, in the multitude of films and videos that they've produced. The times that Walt and Arthur came into the visual communications family during the 1980s was a time when Asian American cinema was institutionalizing and beginning to form a very, very important community infrastructure that would serve it well in a variety of different platforms. We had the 1980 Asian American Media Conference that, that was the grounds from which the then National Asian American Telecommunications Association, came aboard. We also had a transition to where a lot of independents were finding funding support from governmental bodies such as the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the National Endowment for the Arts. And we had a lot of different movements as well. The anti-apartheid movement, the movement for redress and reparations, Vincent Chin, that case was happening, and a whole boatload of other things and stuff. And so I think it's really important, as I share a little picture that I made during the production of Claiming a Voice, to find out a little bit about where, Arthur and
oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness. Whoa.
Oh. Who are those guys?
This is an image of
I want a shot of that.
Walt at KSCI Studios. It was in this room in which they basically assembled, edited, and put together, the Claiming a Voice, documentary and stuff. And I kind of thought that I share this, this piece of these two cats.
Oh, man.
Stage for, how you guys, came into the production, of the film and whatnot. So maybe what I could do is that, Arthur, let's go ahead and start along with you. You kind of like, we're a graduate from San Francisco State University. Your thesis film, Sewing Woman, garnered both a Peabody Award and an Academy Award, nomination. You relocated to Los Angeles, really, establish yourself as an independent filmmaker and stuff. If you can talk a little bit about your entree into visual communications and how you got involved into the Claiming a Voice project.
Well, I first, I was brought up and raised in San Francisco, and I actually made my first film in 1970, which is the year that VC started, 40 years ago, and then made Sewing Woman in 1982. So, and I'm not sure if I had heard much about VC up in San Francisco, but I wasn't involved until I was planning to move down to LA to continue my film studies at the American Film Institute. And at that time, I'm not sure who recommended it, but someone said you must go and visit visual communications. And that I did, and I remember meeting Linda Babalat and Nancy Araki. And they were just so welcoming and with open arms and with the humor, and I mean, literally with welcoming arms when Linda said, if you need a place to stay, you can stay with me. Just hang out, don't worry about it, you're all set. And that was my first introduction to the family. I mean, it really was a family feeling of visual communications. So just fast forward a few years after having done a couple of productions and after just finishing Urban City, USA, it was 1990. And it was time to celebrate 2 decades of visual communications. And I remember meeting with the staff and talking about what can we do? Is there something we can put together? And that was really the start of it, of the production.
Mhm, mhm. Great. Walt, talk to me a little bit about, you coming into this and stuff. As an editor, you were already building a career, as one of the go-to editors, for Asian American cinema. But at the same time, if I remember, you were one of the very first members of the board of directors of what was then the National Asian American Telecommunications Association, which now is called the Center for Asian American Media. But you of all people, have basically been, had a front seat, to the what I look at as like the 80s, the institutionalization and the professionalization, of Asian American cinema, rising up from grassroots to, to being a primary, player in terms of independent cinema and what have you. So you've been able to kind of like see, both ends and, what have you. So if you can talk a little bit about, your entree into VC and how you and Arthur, your professional collaboration developed.
It's interesting because both Arthur and I basically grew up in Chinatown, San Francisco. I didn't know him at the time. I went to St. Mary's. You went to Dean Parker, right, Arthur? Is that
Commodore Stockton.
You went
around the block from St. Mary's.
1 block away. You're at the corner. Same Clay and Stockton. Oh my goodness. So anyway, for those who grew up in San Francisco Chinatown at the time, all we were kids of immigrants. It was a very small community and tight one. And I don't know. I mean, it's too long of a story. But anyway, I found myself interested in media and all that, and I eventually also went to San Francisco State after I finished my BA at Cal Berkeley, and then I went to State for the broadcast program. At the same time, I started working at KQED, which was the PBS station in San Francisco. And so this was the 74, 76, around that period. Anyway, the most important influence around that time for me and how this relates to everything up to today is the influence of these amazing mentors like Lonnie Ding and Felicia Lowe was there, Louise Lowe was there. It was like Emiko Mori. I can just go down this list of names that were, for those who know the early Asian American world, they were like the movie makers. They were the pioneers. They were the ones that opened the doors. And I walked into a place and saw this older woman, and she was producing and directing. I'm a Chinese woman, Lonnie, and I was just like blown away. I said, okay, these guys are doing, I want to get in on this. And so anyway, so that's what happened. 6 years later, I'm in LA and I'm working for a production down there and as an editor. And somewhere in the midst of all that, I get a call from Arthur. And of course, I knew about him. I don't think we ever met before that first interview, Arthur. And this was when he was doing the Forbidden City USA documentary. And I was like, wow, okay, now of all the little things I did up to that point, here was something that was really significant. And it turned out to be, I think, one of the, definitely for me, milestones of my career to have worked with Arthur on that. And so it's not surprising that we end up teaming again for this Claiming a Voice, which there's some similarities in how that was put together. But as far as my introduction to visual communications, I remember, because I was so much into the media and Asian American movement and all that going on in the Bay Area, it was obviously the VC of LA was very significant. And I remember when they started shooting Hito Hata, and I came down to LA, and I think this was before I actually moved down here. I came down to visit, and I went to find the VC offices to just, check them out. And nobody was there. It was like this warehouse, on the second floor building, and they had the place just filled with wardrobe and costume and stuff. And I asked somebody that was there, I said, where is everybody? They're out shooting, man. It's like they got a lot to do. And I was so impressed, the scale of what they were doing. Anyway, to make that connection, to go back to because I was in LA now, and then I became one of the representatives, John Nasaki and myself were the two reps that represent Los Angeles as the national organization in San Francisco was forming. through monies from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and all that for a national, organization to tie in all the media groups around the country, Asian, Pacific Islanders, and so forth. And I was so like, I'm in, man. I want in on all of this. It was just so much going on. It was such an exciting period, Arthur. I don't know. I mean, I think all of us, Abe, you were right there in the core of it, and it was exciting. And so I became a board member of the NATA group, which is now called CAM, but as a rep from LA, actually, ironically. And we had people from New York, we had people from Texas, we had people from up Pacific Northwest, and I think Seattle. People from all over the country would come by, and we had these board meetings, and it was exciting.
Yeah, great.
I want to add a little historical context. In San Francisco, before I came down to LA, I would say about the late 70s, at least in terms of my experience, late 70s into the mid 80s, there was an independent filmmakers group called the Film Arts Foundation,
Right.
which was a very strong organization back then that was put together by independent filmmakers, documentary filmmakers mostly, but also narrative filmmakers and experimental filmmakers. And that was what nurtured my sense of being an independent filmmaker and gave me the idea that, yes, this can be done. Also, you have to remember that in San Francisco at that time, I would say in the early 70s was when, late 60s into the early 70s was when Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas graduated from film school here in LA, UCLA and USC, and decided to go back to San Francisco and say, well, we're going to turn our backs on Hollywood and create this independent system. So in San Francisco, there was a lot of activity in terms of nurturing the idea of being an independent filmmaker. So, and NATA that you referenced and the conference that you referenced in 1980 had started, I think, in 1982 or so, but they were funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Yeah. So they had a certain motivation and idea behind their organization at that time. So to move to LA and to find an organization like Visual Communications, it really felt comfortable because I had all this nurturing up in San Francisco already in terms of being an independent filmmaker. And I wasn't sure how that would work out and how I would find that same kind of support in LA, which most San Franciscans think of as Hollywood, the glamour of Hollywood, the business of Hollywood. So really Visual Communications was this spark of light. And,
Great. Yeah, you did mention, the influence of Film Arts Foundation. And I do think that, that gets me to thinking that, at around that time, there's this network of people who really were like, our mentors and what have you, whether or not it was Bob, Eddie, Ellen, Dwayne at Visual Communications, Gail Silva at Film Arts Foundation, Keiko Suno, at DCTV, the folks from Asian Cinevision, Peter Chow, Christine Choi, and Choi Hark. Really, those folks, and of course, Lonnie and and all the other folks and what have you. I think that, gosh, that really was a network of a bunch of patron saints that nowadays, I'm not sure that, we have, but, there are newer people who've kind of like taken, their place and stepped in. But I'm going to come back to that point for just a second, but let me go ahead and, take you guys to 1990 when you got that phone call from Linda Mabalit, asking, if you guys, might want to participate in our 20th anniversary activities. We were already doing a book. And we were planning some kind of an event. And as you guys probably know, Visual Communications at that time was the kind of organization that, was really community-based, but, it had certain quirks and what have you. It wasn't into like patting itself on the back. Many of us are very microphone-centric. microphone phobic when it came to getting up in front of a crowd and just like being the host with the most and what have you. Linda really had that resonance and stuff for getting things done and what have you. And in terms of like telling a story about visual communications, when for all of us on the organization was like a lot of inside baseball, it really, I think, needed to have like two people who were kind of like still on the outside looking in, to be able to take a look at VC's development vis-a-vis the larger Asian American movement, and VC's role within that movement to, really tell a as honest and as accurate a story as possible. So why don't you guys like talk a little bit about, specifically how you guys got involved in the project?
Well, I remember that, and it's interesting. We're talking about 1990, which is what, 30 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
And it harkens me back to thinking when I interview people about their lives in the past, and I would get frustrated because they would say, well, that was a long time ago. That was 20, 30 years ago. How do you expect me to remember? And I said, oh, come on, can't you remember? So in response to you, I haven't really thought about this since we've done the film, but what I can remember, history changes and evolves, right? As people tell their own point of view of the history. Yeah. So my memory of the history of how this started was that it wasn't definitive in terms of what this should be, the project, the media project. All I think I was told was we want to do something for the anniversary. We wanted to show something on the screen. It was going to be at the Japanese American Theater. And there was a lot of open discussion, as I recall, of what it could be. And my notion is what it ended up being was a long form documentary. I don't think it was going to, I don't think it started as an idea to do a long form documentary. That's my memory. I think I had to pitch that idea to all of you who were there, that no, I really see this as a long form documentary because there is this breadth of history. And there are so many things happening during those 20 years besides just the productions. And I wanted to put those productions in a historical context.
Sure.
And I wanted to, because I had just, and Walt and I had just finished Forbidden City, and we told that story through personal stories. And we told that history through personal lives and their involvement. And I thought, and you're right, being from the outside, I saw all of these, and this is said in the most positive way, all these characters at VC and all these crazy people working at visual communications, but the product they put out was nowhere crazy like they were, or, is this coming across right? You know what I mean, right? You guys were a lot of fun. You guys were community, you were good down home. But really, when you look at the products, it's like, wow, these are really professional, polished products. And that's what I wanted to capture, or at least that was my idea of capturing. These personalities and this important work that you all did.
Walt?
And the thing I want to chime in is that the one thing which makes this stuff work, as Arthur is saying, is the personal individual stories. Arthur is a good interviewer. He gets the stuff out of these people. I mean, and so it's pithy stuff. He gets them very relaxed, and the stories, I mean, they just kind of tell themselves in a way. And as the editor, my job was to take a lot of that stuff. Arthur goes through it. He's very systematic. He has, he gets transcripts and all that, and then he maps things out. My fun part, my contribution was that I got to look at all these documentaries, all the shorts they made. And it was it was just such variety and full of life. Their work represent the type of people they were. And that was the thing that was fun for me. I get to pick and choose what my favorite bits were to add to the kind of texture of this whole piece, which is a combination of talking heads and short clips from the film. And it's just a lot of fun. And for those who, obviously, it's available right now, right? You want to do that plug, Ape, that they can log in and watch the whole thing free. And if they were if they had read the thing and watched it up to this point before this, you can still watch it after. Obviously, it's going to be available for a while. But, you know, that was the fun I had, just how to craft all these pieces, take all these little things and then cut them up, put it back together again. And that's what I like about definitely working on an Arthur project.
Right.
In fact,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that one of the things that's really great that Arthur had mentioned was how he was able to capture, you know, the sense that, you know, the visual communications staff were very, very purposeful in terms of what they were doing and very clear. You know, the visual communications staff that I was a part of during the 1980s, let me tell you, didn't seem like anything like that. You know, for one thing, Linda, you know, basically did not have any formal hiring practices. She basically like had a 100% handpicked staff. And in terms of legacies, when you talk about Eddie, Alan, Bob, and Dwayne, you know, those are like 4 cowboys who basically like ran an organization, you know, that they, you know, logically did not know or should not have known how to run, you know, and whatnot, because, you know, they were, you know, 4 guys who were involved in the movement and, you know, who basically, you know, were telling stories, you know, that sought to be more honest and accurate about, you know, our lives and experiences. But running an organization like that, you know, like, oh my God, you know, if you want to see like a contrast, you know, visual communications to the duo of James Yee and Janice Sakamoto, who ran the old Naughton. It's kind of like, wow, that's kind of like night and day, you know, and whatnot and stuff. So I'm like, wow, that's just, it's just crazy.
And I hope we captured some of that. And I saw the film again after a couple of decades, just a couple weeks ago, and I think we captured some of that spirit, that kind of cowboy spirit, the frontier spirit.
Okay, while you're talking about that, I'm going to share the screen and just grab and show you this one little montage section. I best exemplifies this. It's just, I mean, these were what these guys looked like. Long hairs. That's Dwayne. That's Bob.
Pat Lau.
And
Steve
Tatsukawa. I mean, these are the outs, and it just
UCLA, camera tests, you know, and whatnot. So wow, you know, that's, you know, I take a look at that particular clip all the time because the unedited version of that, you know, is in our archive along with all the really, you know, crazy stuff that they shot in Griffith Park, where they, you know, basically look like a witch's coven or what have you. And that's part of like the end credits and
right. I use that for the end credits.
Yeah. So, you know, the whole fun, you know, part about that is, yeah, you know, you did, you know, catch this sense of spirit and verve and you know, and purpose, you know, that was part of visual communications. But I think that one of the things that I liked, Arthur and Walt, is that as you got more into the 80s and what have you, you kind of like brought the prism out a little bit, you know, to show what the impact, you know, of visual communications is all about. Now, mind you, a lot of these people were doing like their own thing in the Bay Area and in New York and Seattle and other places and stuff. But when we were taking a look at visual communications production vis-a-vis, you know, pieces that I regard as landmarks, such as Nisei Soldier or The Color of Honor or Who Killed Vincent Chin, or any of a variety of clips that you were able to sneak in into the end montage, Walt, you know, that, you know, I really do think that when we open up this legacy, that it kind of really feels that what we were doing at the 20th anniversary was, you know, making a handoff, you know, to what was, you know, like an exponentially growing, you know, community that would embrace all kinds of forms, all kinds of platforms. And, you know, for me, you know, beginning the assault on Fortress Hollywood, you know, that was, you know, impenetrable to us back in the 1980s. But, you know, when you know, take a look at where we're at today, you know, with us having like, you know, done an end around, you know, the whole thing through streaming, with pioneers like, the Wong Fu production folks, and then, the entree of, of things on Netflix and Hulu and other, things and what have you. I really do think that, you had anticipated, some really good things that were going to be happening, post, a completion of the film.
I think Arthur, you can say a little something. I mean, this thing always boggles my mind, that someone like Arthur, who single-handedly did all this work, very shrewd kind of guy, and you made a living, you made a career out of just doing your own personal work. I don't think you've been commissioned to do things for other people that much. It seems like, is that true, Arthur? You have made a living, a life out of this. Being independent against the system. It just should fail. You should have been homeless by now. Well, maybe not, but explain yourself, Arthur.
Well, I think there was a shift going on in terms of media arts organizations, funding for media arts organizations. And I remember soon after the 1990 anniversary celebration at VC, Linda and the board of directors started shifting their focus in terms of where the funding was going to come from, because they had to survive. And many media arts organizations all across the nation had to do this. I remember the first event she did this, and she kind of warned me, because I was just so enamored of the way VC survived as community-based organizations. So I remember she goes, at this event, this next event, I don't know what year it was, maybe someone can remember for me. I'm gonna have, I think her name was Lily Lee. She was from she was in Monterey Park. She was a mayor or, anyway, she goes, we're gonna start getting corporate support. And that's why Lily is going to be speaking today. And she actually pulled me aside to warn me, because she knew how I felt about corporations and their infusion of funding and their influence. She was, but we need to do this. And I felt really uneasy. I mean, I remember feeling uneasy at the idea that VC, of all groups that I got involved in, was going to quote unquote sell out. But I think it was a wise move on her part, because it was part of reality. It's part of what is necessary to survive and to be a part of the media community. And when I say community, I'm not talking about grassroots community. I'm going to include studios and larger projects and corporations, because they are part of media, and we need to infiltrate that as well.
Sure.
And which is what's happened over the past 30 years.
Yeah.
That's the move forward.
Yeah. I think that opening up the whole idea of community, just picking up on your comment, Arthur, was something that, we saw with Linda back in the 80s as well, because, one of the realities of the situation was that that organizations like VC was going to have to tap other sources in order to survive. I remember for the longest time, that Linda would never, take any money from the Adolph Coors company, because, she had a thing about, that company's then policy of being anti-LGBT. I also remember as well that when Linda picked up on fellow staffer John Asaki's idea of not doing just another suit and tie rubber chicken dinner, and instead doing something really community-based and keeping in line with VC's way of connecting with community, again, and coming up with a chili and rice plate cook-off inspired by the cuisine at the old holiday bowl, that people didn't know if that was going to fly. Even some of our board members at the time, were scratching their heads and going like, "What, a chili cook-off?" I think that Linda and the staff, just realized that if we were going to evolve, and bring in other people and stuff, that the reality of the situation was that us media makers from the 70s, we've graduated from college, we've started families. They don't want to basically like leave people at home, to babysitters. we wanted to involve our kids, that next generation, in the things that we were building for them now, right? So I really do think that when you started seeing, some of the little whippersnappers like, like Angela Nishio and Tad Nakamura and all the little kids, who accompanied their parents, around, that time, and seeing what they've all become, like, doctors, nurses, filmmakers, media professionals, politicians, and, and what have you. I kind of really think that that goes hand in hand with, what Linda and, the staff of the 80s was thinking about in terms of, like, widening the, the big top tent, for everybody, and allowing for people, such as yourself, such as Valerie So, such as Lori Sang in Washington, D.C., such as, all these other pieces, all these other filmmakers and artists, who had things to say in film and media, but were looking for a place, to touch down and call home. I really do think that that was a very important impact, that she had on a whole generation of people.
Hey, let's introduce, we got these people here.
Yeah.
The originals here.
Yeah.
Eddie Wong, my goodness.
Oh my God, Eddie, what's up? And we also,
just hanging out at home.
yes. All right. We also have a couple of folks who are.
Hang on, just a sec. I got this because you did
Okay.
to us a.
All right. Okay.
Here's the Eddie Wong.
Oh my God.
Plus Eddie Wong. I mean, look at that. He looks exactly the same. The guy does not age. And then here's Amy. My goodness, how young? There's Abe.
Oh, shut up! Skip it.
Yeah. There's Abe, and then there's Amy and John. I mean,
John.
And here we are, and so the originals are all here. That's amazing.
I think that in addition, it's really important to note that one of the folks who was one of VC's sound engineers during the 1970s, and eventually became.
I thought he was a roadie.
No, not a roadie, but who became the president of our board of directors during the 1980s. Douglas Ihara is here joining us as well, and whatnot. So so it's really great to see some of these folks. Here.
You guys, I mean, are we going to? You guys can unmute and say a few words. Eddie, what's your? Did you get a chance to re-watch Claiming?
Yeah, I did. I really liked that documentary. I mean, of course, I was really interested in the works that were done after us, like in the 80s. Like I've never seen Pak Chung on Fire.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to go see some of those films, actually.
Right.
But the breadth of the work is pretty impressive. I mean, it's just amazing that VC's lasted this long. And it's all due to the people like John and Amy and Linda and people who kept it going through its hardest periods when it was like dead broke, and people like Doug who kind of like stuck in there through thick and thin. So hats off to everybody. 50 years is quite an achievement.
Mm-hmm.
Amy, John, unmute yourself, say something. And Doug too. I mean, there's such a historic, I mean, again, I think what Arthur and I were saying before is that there was this genesis of people coming together at that time. Amy, you were like, what, 16, 15? When did you join?
When I came to VC, I was 23.
Oh, you just look young, yeah.
But I have to say, out of all the, we couldn't have done it without Doug, because he's been there thick and thin through all.
Don't say that.
Yeah. I'm trying to say you're the oldest one, Doug. Yeah. But John, what was it like? I mean, they asked us the first, time you guys heard of or got involved VC. What was the thing that pulled you in?
Well, I was Bob Nakamura's student at UCLA because I had come down after teaching middle school up north. I had applied to film school. So the first Asian American filmmaker I encountered in film school was Bob Nakamura, Professor Nakamura. And I really didn't even know who this guy was at the time. I just saw Nakamura on the class list. And I said, oh, I'll sign up with this guy who has a Japanese name and see what happens. And so he was, first day of class, he showed Watari Dori, Birds of Passage. And I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty revolutionary, making a film about your own family and JA history, Issei, and then Issei. So that kind of started the whole ball rolling. And then that quarter that I was in his class, he was prepping to shoot Hitohata. This was in 1979. So he enlisted all the people in his class to be volunteers on the shoot. So we all went out to near Manzanar and Bishop to shoot the railroad scene for Hitohata. And of course, somebody who's brand new to filmmaking, this is all really exciting and heady stuff. So I was kind of hooked. Initially, I was just going to stay in LA for a couple of years to work on my master's at UCLA and then go back to teach middle school. But, running around in the wilderness with a camera, shooting people like Mako and Yuki Shimoda, I gave up teaching at that point and stayed in LA. Then I met this woman here in BC during Hitohata. So it all goes back to Hitohata.
There you go.
Great.
So
Hey,
Amy, any of that true, or he just made all that up?
You mean about him coming to BC?
No, okay, no, I'm sure that's true. Okay, but for yourself.
Well,
Actually not-
is I was just graduated from USC, and I wasn't a film student at USC. I was an Asian American Studies major, but I got involved with many of the filmmakers there, like Dale Iwamasa, Janice Tanaka, and they would work on these student films. So I would volunteer on them as a continuity person. And so Dale, who was a cinematographer on Hitohata, said that they needed somebody to come in and help Nancy in continuity and also be a community liaison person. So like you, Walt, you were saying, I went to the warehouse on Boyle Avenue and walked up the stairs, and they're in one of those long meetings, and because there's contract and I guess staff, and so I'm peering in and nobody's coming out. Then Steve Tatsukawa finally comes out and says, "Hey, how you doing?" And then he kind of gave me a little interview and asked, what my background was, and I told him I could speak Japanese. And one of the other things that really impressed me about Steve is that he sat there going, "Well, you want to go to lunch?" So he took me to Tokyo Gardens and said, "Oh, you have to try the shumai chashu, meal." So I said, "Oh, okay." And then, all along he's talking away in his Hawaiian shirt and his glasses. And I said, smoking. And I said, "Well, this guy's really out there, but, I think I could work here." And then I ended up meeting Nancy, who, was very, I think at that time she was like 47 years old. And so we hit it off, and then I ended up working on continuity, and then getting involved with the staff. And I thought at that time, I said, "God, these guys are really old," but they were 30 at that time. And then, I ended up working, long hours and getting involved with the community. And, I thought that it was my way of learning filmmaking at VC.
Yeah.
Great. Hey, Doug, I wanted to have you jump in for a little bit because you became the president of the board of directors at a time when visual communications was like in a very, very down period and stuff. If you can talk just very quickly about some of the developments that happened during that time when VC was transitioning over from a filmmakers cooperative that you first became familiar with to a full service media arts center, and starting to incorporate different practices, and what have you, and stuff. If you can talk a little bit about that really quickly.
Well, that's a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that the first thing that we had to decide at the time was who was going to lead VC. And this was around in the early 80s. And that's actually when I started getting involved on the board, though I had been involved with some of the production from a sound engineer aspect. And Steve Tatsukawa and Dwayne Kubo, who are two of my best friends, were, as you know, actively involved in VC. And so when Hito Hata was done, it kind of left VC in debt, and big debt.
Yeah, big debt.
And big debt, especially for those days, I mean, what was 6 figures, if I recall right, over $100,000 in the early 80s. You were able to buy 2 or 3 houses for that amount of money back then.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the best decision I ever made was deciding that Linda would be the future ED versus Nancy. I think that was a really, really tough decision, but the right one. And then from there, it was just, let's try and keep the doors open. And John and Amy were there, obviously. And basically just the 4 of us for a while, if I recall right.
Yeah, I think that at that time it was Linda and Nancy, and then John and Amy. And then when I remember coming around, they had another cat from the Hito Hata production, Kaz Takeuchi, who was working
that's right, Kaz,
as a carpenter at 20th Century Fox. He was our darkroom supervisor. He basically ran the darkroom. So that basically really was visual communications. And
actually,
only a couple of them.
John Rear too. John Rear.
That's right.
Oh, yeah,
John Rear.
Okay, but let me jump in before we get too far off of that. I think only because the mention of Steve Tatsukawa. I mean, that's what I remember.
Yeah.
And Doug, could you give us a little rundown? Where was he? I mean, he was so instrumental in those early parts. I'm going to I can't help it as our guy put B-roll in. So go ahead, talk, and I'm going to take over some.
Well, Steve was one of the most unusual guys, and I don't think I have never met anybody like him, obviously. And I met him early on at UCLA along with Dwayne, and we became very good friends. And he's the one that got me onto the board. And at the time, he was working at KPCC, is that right?
KCT.
KCET, that's right, KCET. And he had just been promoted to the program manager for Asian Pacific films, right? I mean, he was up there. Mm-hmm. And then, gosh, wasn't about a year later that he had an aneurysm on his heart and passed away. So he didn't get to see us come back from the dead, so to speak.
I think that we also, even though he went to KCT, he would always come to VC after work and help John with, the grants, and would confer with us. And he was always there, and we could always call him at KCT because he was really worried about you know, the state of VC and how we're all going to make it. And I guess feeling bad that, you know, there's just a core people there. And so I was just really impressed on his dedication.
I think the thing also,
and then he also was able to get that our first Apple through networking with Nata and Asian Cinevision. So
come on, computer.
yeah, computer to kind of
Right.
network these. So that helped us in terms of getting computers.
And I think this goes back,
Yep. Mhm.
yeah, I'm sorry. This goes back to stuff that Arthur was mentioning before also. The ability of people like, say, Bob and Linda and Steve and obviously Eddie too. There are these people that could kind of cross the boundaries of corporate, business, whatever, community, independent, nonprofit. And Steve could put on a suit. He could be wearing his Hawaiian shirts, and it's amazing that he could speak and you know, with the boardrooms and stuff. And Linda had that ability to do
That's
it.
right.
And I
Yeah.
think that is what was really significant, my memory of it, because in my mind, I couldn't have seen how they could do this. You see these guys, these people that were just so real in a very gritty sort of way, but yet they could, you know, dance that dance when they had to, and not give it all away, as it were, but to actually utilize their talents and pull these people in support.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that when Linda was talking to me when I shortly after I started working at VC, one of the things that she always stressed to me was the fact that, you know, it basically is the same movement but a different day, and that you know, we have to like speak, you know, the language, you know, of the people that we're trying to get on board in order to like, you know, to expand, you know, that circle, you know, as it were. You know, it was just really crazy because Linda was doing all of this stuff. And when I, you know, when I first started working at VC, her quote unquote uniform, a lot of times, you know, basically consisted of a brown print muumuu and a pair of picky shoes. I think that some years later, Dwayne Ibata from the JACCC basically admonished her that, you know, in order to move around in these circles, you've got to get yourself a power suit. So she ultimately, you know, wound up doing that. So basically she was practicing, you know, that walk the same way that Steve was as well, just, you know, wearing that, you know, that suit during the day when you're, you know, taking care of the business, and then, you know, just being yourself, you know, when you're off the clock. I think that that's, you know, one of the things that, you know, really, you know, impressed me, you know, about Linda and about Steve for the very, very, you know, short time that I had gotten, you know, to know him. We're kind of like getting to this point where we're going to be wrapping up, but I wanted to ask you, Walt and Arthur, you know, this question, but, you know, anybody else, you know, is free to answer as well, that 3 weeks ago, on April 10th, in 1971, VC received its 501c3 designation as a nonprofit organization. That was 50 years ago, you know, back on March 10th. And so we're technically 3.5 weeks into VC's golden anniversary, 50th anniversary year. And one of the things I always wonder while revisiting Claiming a Voice is whether or not you know, it's possible to be able to, you know, to talk in these terms, you know, of visual communications as this Johnny Appleseed, or a progenitor of the Asian American movement and media movement, you know, 50 years on, because obviously in the 30 years that, you know, that VC has celebrated its 20th anniversary, so many developments and changes has happened in the APA, you know, community, you know, and whatnot. And even though people like Lonnie Ding, and Lillian Jimenez and other folks are no longer around, I really do think that, you know, there are other, you know, organizations and other people, you know, that have kind of like stepped in to help grow, this whole thing. I did reference, the Wong Fu guys from San Diego, DC San Diego with Wong Fu Productions, also Herman Liu. I can't let this conversation go without, Herman Liu from Third World Newsreel and the 16 millimeter film workshop that he was running for many, many years with JT Takagi, and folks. And then I remember speaking to his class in 1993. I had met this young lady named Grace Lee, who would become an excellent multiple award-winning documentary filmmaker, and also would be responsible for the founding of the Asian American Documentary Network, ADOC. With all the growth that's happening these days, what kind of a claiming a voice, would we be able to make, or what kind of history of visual communications within the framework of the Asian American movement would be able to make today? And I ask that knowing that next Monday is going to be the premiere of Renee Tanjima's 5-part Asian American series on public television, and whatnot. 5 hours, 5 hours is not enough in my opinion to tell that story, but hey, we'll take it. But just getting back to that, what kind of a film do you guys would be making about visual communications if instead of the 20th, it would be the 50th?
Well, I think none of this happens in isolation. You talk about ACV in New York, NATA, CAM in San Francisco, and here in LA. There was also the Asian Resource Workshop in Boston, and Seattle had their own group, and other places around the country. And none of it happens in isolation, but I think your notion of BC being like Johnny Appleseed, spreading the seeds, I think that's a good notion and basis for quickly answering your question is that what VC's been doing the last 30 years, especially is nurturing not only organizations saying to organizations nationwide, you can do this, because we've done it and we survived the Hirohata days, the budget crisis, and we're still here. And that's inspirational and motivational, and then that's important. But also the workshops that VC has put on, the digital camera workshop, on with the digital camera workshops, all the various workshops throughout this history. I've taught a couple of them. I know Walt teaches a lot of them. That all spreads out. And I think all of that is important, and that lays the groundwork. And if I were to do a 50th anniversary documentary, my goodness, it'd be daunting, because there's so much wealth of talent and productions now compared to what we had 30 years ago. That it'd be difficult. And like you say, to document, like you say, with the series that's coming up Monday, 5 hours, is that it? I mean, what, Ken Burns gets 10 hours or 15 hours for baseball or jazz. Why are we limited to 5? I mean, there are a lot of reasons, yes. There's the reality of budgeting and limitations of time slots in the PBS system. But we've moved far ahead. And there is just so much more to do, because 5 hours isn't enough. You're correct.
Yeah,
Totally agree. It's a tough one. It's a lot of stuff. People have spread out so much more diverse now. I mean, we've got streaming now. The fact we're doing this, I think the future is bright. I totally believe that. I think the legacy of visual communications will continue. It's constantly evolving. It's constantly changing. It's updating. It's still something to get behind. I mean, I think we're all behind it. Otherwise, we wouldn't still be talking about it. And it's always nice to look back to remember our history, but just as important, we got to set the stage for what's to come. And I'm ready, man. This stuff is exciting.
Cool.
And after seeing the Canadian Voice documentary I saw a couple of weeks ago, just to refresh my memory, and so much of what the ideals were back then still hold true today. That is telling our own stories. It's in fact, it was interesting in some of the promo, the series that's coming up Monday, they actually use the phrase claim a voice. And I remember when we came up with the title Claiming a Voice for the documentary, and it was like, that was a new idea, claiming a voice. And still today, 30 years later, PBS is using that phrase for its promotions. So there's just so much more work to be done.
Okay. Abe, yeah, go ahead. You wanted to wrap up? I was going to play the end credits for Claiming, which is really significant. It's about 5 minutes, and I know we're kind of going over.
Yeah, I do. But before we go ahead and do that, I just want to go ahead and thank everybody for joining us. I mean, like, you know, obviously we can talk about this forever, you know, and what have you, but, you know, there is a lot of film festival that's left, you know, for this month. We're only like 4 days into Asian Pacific Heritage Month, and you know, the folks at Visual Communications has put together a really fantastic slate of work. So I do encourage you to follow that. As I mentioned, we're going to be showing some of our long form, you know, pieces as part of the you know, next installments of VC Connect. As a matter of fact, next Monday night, we're going to be showing a couple of pieces from our catalog, Omai Fatasi, Samoa, Mo Samoa, as well as Vaitape Running Waters, and a short piece called Napua Olaka as part of a showcase called Past Pacifica, you know, that looks at VC's first forays into Pacific Islander, you know, centric work. And then on the 18th, we're gonna wrap up this 3-part look at VC's filmography with a program that's dedicated to the work and the legacy of our former executive director, Linda Mabalit. So I really encourage you to check that out. Now, I know that Walt has something going on and stuff, and I know that he cut this together. I kind of like teased it before and what have you. And so I think that I'm gonna go ahead and have Walt, you know, outro us before we, you know, end everything. But we wanna definitely thank all of you for joining us here on the Zoom. Doug, you know, your legacy is, you know, really, you know, extensive. You know, you've been here as a board member almost as long as I've been around. You know, even more than I've been around as a staff member. John and Amy, you know, you guys' you know, impact on visual communications and on me personally, you know, cannot be overstated. You know, I'm like really, you know, thankful and appreciative that you know, that we were on staff together for those many years while Linda was running her hand-picked staff, and I had to emphasize again, hand-picked staff. And Eddie, you know, as a you know, as one of our founders, one of our you know, godfathers, and a you know, an inspiration to me, I want to thank you for joining us from Oaktown and you know, in you know, being here and stuff. So on that note, Walt, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about what
real quick. Ending a doc is always hard. Arthur and I remember we struggled with how to end Forbidden City, the documentary. And I came up with this idea, I think. He agreed to it. So it wasn't like we didn't fight over this one. But I stole it from, you talked about Lucas earlier. What was his one night at the Mel's Drive-In? What was that? American Graffiti. And how they ended that film. And I always remember that even though those are fictitious people, they put this epilogue at the end where they put their faces up, and I picked nice, happy faces, and then we put a little, you know, a little graphic to say, where are those people now, type thing. So I followed the same, that's how we ended Forbidden City. And so when it came to ending this piece, which had a lot of players in it, I did the same thing. So I'll just take the screen over and we'll just play this to the end. It's a little 5 minutes, but we're gonna start with our very own Eddie himself. And let me pull this in. Let me go full screen. Hopefully that the internet will keep it in sync, but watch the real thing on your own if this falls out of sync for you. Here we go.
I think it's amazing that it is an institution today that's 20 years old. And it's really to the credit of people who have worked there throughout its 20-year history, not just the people who founded it, because it takes a lot to keep it going. It takes a lot of personal sacrifice and dedication. And I think that that was there through every period of VC.
And what did we survive for? Because racism still exists in this country. And despite the very few inroads we've made in media as a whole has not fully reflected the many different kinds of people in the United States. And whether we're producing media or whether we're in an advocacy role, our work is not over.
We are the children of the migrant worker. We are the offspring of the concentration. Sons and daughters of the railroad builder. Leave their stamp on America. We are the children of the Chinese waiter. Born and raised in the laundry room. We are the offspring of the Japanese gardener. Leave their stamp on America. Sing a song for ourselves. What have we got to lose? Sing a song for ourselves. We got the right to choose. We got the right to choose. We got the right to choose. Foster children of the Pepsi generation. Cowboys and Indians ride, white man ride. Hey, watching war movies with the next door neighbor. Secretly rooting for the other side. Sing a song for ourselves. What have we got to lose? Sing a song for ourselves. We got the right to choose. We got the right to choose. We got the right to choose. We are the cousins of the freedom fighter. Brothers and sisters all around the world. We are a part of the third world people who will leave their